this month's Mission Mosquito webinar. My name is Cassie Soping, and I'm the campaign coordinator for the Globe Mission Mosquito campaign. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Rusty Lowe.
Hi, everyone. Rusty Lowe. I'm the science lead for Mosquito Habitat Mapper, Globe Observer's citizen science tool. And I'm just delighted to be here today with our guest speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to point out that the data that I'm sharing right now is our cumulative mosquito observations beginning January of 2017, current as of yesterday's collected data. And what's important to note is that we have been growing this database from the beginning. It didn't exist before you as citizen scientists started making observations. So it's absolutely incredible that we have this many mosquito photographs from their habitats and their larvae. And as you know, the larvae are the most important things that we can photograph and contribute because we're collecting and creating an AI that will help us identify those three medically important genera of mosquitoes. I mentioned that to Anne when I asked her to talk if she, that she had all the time she wanted. And I know that her message is so important and so exciting that I wanted to give her as much time. So I step back, and the time now is for Ann Lewis, but our featured speaker is the grants program director for the South Dakota Discovery Center in Pierre, South Dakota. She works at the intersection of people, science, and the environment, and her passion is connecting people, educators, and community members to the outdoors for exploration and discovery. But there's so much more about Ann I'd like to share. She's dedicated to the education community, which is evident in her favorite activity, that's facilitating professional development for educators. I participated in a 3-day field study with her in the Badlands, and it was amazing. Ann's work is all about making a difference. Currently, she's involved in the Macro Blitz Project, a national initiative in collaboration with National Geographic that encourages people to document aquatic macroinvertebrates and contribute to scientific learning through iNaturalist. For over 25 years, Anne has worked at the South Dakota Discovery Center. She advocates and facilitates the braiding of Indigenous ways of knowing with Western science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. She's also the project director for the TALES, the teaching artifacts from lived experiences used in story teaching, which I found fascinating. This empowers educators to look beyond the textbook and teach with artifacts from their lived experiences, and I think you'll see where this will be connected in her talk. Anne's approach is simple yet profound, where teachers use their personal experiences to teach learning outcomes and make it a living experience for students. When students see something that they're learning in class, it relates to the real world and it changes how they look at the material. Anne is a 2023 National Geographic Explorer, a 2019 National Geographic Education Fellow, a 2017 National Geographic Lindbat Grosvenor Teacher Fellow, and most importantly for our community, she's also a Globe Partner. So Anne, you have all the time to share your story with us.
And are you going to be recording this, Cassie?
I should be already, aren't I?
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Seeing the recording. Well, thank you, Cassie. Wow. Feeling a little like high, and that was quite the introduction. And really excited to be here with everyone today. So you've heard a lot about me, about stuff that I was like, wow, really appreciate that introduction. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Super excited to see a really large, diverse audience here. And I just need to kind of get our, okay. So, as Cassie said, she attended a professional development with me a few months ago. And for those of you not in the US, South Dakota, where I'm from, is the traditional and current lands of the people of the Oceti Sakowin. the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota speaking people, Indigenous people. I know not everybody here is from North America or the US. So hopefully that the lessons I share that from my experience today, you'll be able to take home with you or find applicable to your context. Because really, this is working with the Oceti Sakowin is really like the extent of my experience. I don't have a PhD in Indigenous studies or culturally relevant STEM. A lot of what I'm sharing today, I learned the hard way. And so you can see the subtitle is Lessons Learned Sometimes the Hard Way. Also, just as a point of information, OSEUs, I will be referring to that throughout our time together, and that stands for the Oceti Sakowin Essential Understandings. And Essential Understandings is a document developed by the South Dakota Department of Education for Native and reservation communities, as well as white dominant culture communities, to understand the people and the history and the traditions of the Oceti Sakowin. So, all right. So
I don't think, excuse me, Anne, I'm not seeing your slides.
Okay. Let me stop because I moved.
Yeah, that's no worries.
Okay. Let me go ahead and start sharing it again.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you see them now?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, okay.
I just see the Ignite banner.
Yeah. I'm fuddling with some things on the back end here. All right. So the South Dakota Discovery Center was asked to develop Ignite, which is a K-5 STEM enrichment curriculum. And we were approached by the Todd County School District, which is the school district that encompasses the lands of the Shinchangu, the Rosebud Reservation. And this was, kind of this was started by another educator, Dr. Bree Oatman, and she has since gone on to teach at Lower Brule, another reservation. And so when she left, this became my responsibility. And up until that point, I mean, I had some experience teaching in reservations and in Indigenous communities. I was like a guest instructor at some of the tribal colleges, but I really had to level up quickly. And fortunately, this curriculum Ignite is developed with the input of Native educators and cultural experts. So I am responsible for the STEM and knowing enough of the culture to find those intersections. But I don't have to be the cultural expert. And in fact, it makes a lot of sense for me not to take on that role. Our approach has been, again, a dominant culture institution working with Native people, North American Native people, is we think about relationship and accountability, particularly in cultural aspects. And this is in contrast to transactionality. And that's there's kind of a lot to unpack there. And I don't know that I want to do the fullest, deepest dive in that. But essentially, what this boils down to is we are about relationship. We don't start out this didn't come about because we sent an email to someone saying, hey, we want to collaborate. This curriculum and our work with the different tribal organizations is really as a result of a long-standing collaboration and work on different projects throughout, I've been throughout, I don't know, 20 whatever years. And so I don't know where everybody who's watching this webinar will be in that process. I know there's a lot of interest in collaborating with tribal communities. And of course, I'm talking from a very US centric perspective, but that doesn't cut it when you're talking about wanting to work with Indigenous peoples. Sending an email saying, hey, I'd like to collaborate. I've got an opportunity. There's a little bit more required there. Another thing a place we've had to come to in our approach is when we consider the history, particularly in the US, to a certain degree in Canada, also, well, not just to a certain degree, but also in Canada. And those are really the only nations I'm deeply familiar with, likely South America and Central America as well. When you look at the history there, it's really awful. I mean, it is, let's call it what it is. It was genocide. And that is a lot to deal with. You know, here you are, you're in this place, you're working with these amazing people. And so what do you do with that? Well, the first thing you have to get rid of is you are not responsible for any of that history, but you have a responsibility to it. You have a responsibility to the people. You have a responsibility to help in the repairs. Most of us watching this webinar really aren't in a position to make substantive reparations or land back or any of that. So if you have a responsibility to rather than a responsibility for mindset, that helps you avoid what in North America is in Native circles is often called white saviorism, where you're going to come in and you're going to save everybody and you're going to fix this. You're not. So just don't even try. You have a responsibility and you should know what it is. And you do that by, knowing what your lane is, like what can you do and what can't you do? What is yours to work with and what is not yours to work with? And that right there, knowing your lane, is a lot of trial and error and having people you can talk to and are accountable to in cultural aspects and just observing rather than leading out. Don't always be the first. Don't be the one who drives the program. And then especially for in our space, we have to be aware of current controversies, political and otherwise, both within the Indigenous community and between the Indigenous community and the dominant culture. Not to get too political, but South Dakota's governor does not have a good relationship with the tribal governments. And we need to be aware of that. We also need to be aware of like a situation where around language use. And there's a big controversy within the community that I work with, where in the 1970s, a European man, actually, I think he's from Czechoslovakia. I don't know if he's Czech or Slovak, but he came in and he was working. He found there was a need for language, orthography, spelling, recording the language consistently. So he developed a system, Lakota Language Consortium, and that has become very controversial because he enlisted the aid of elders, native speakers, and now 40, 50 years later, they are selling the resources back to the communities and they're not cheap. So that has created a lot of controversy. So you kind of just need to read the landscape when you are working with an Indigenous community and realize the history, what's happened, what the controversies, what the sore points are, and just if you go in with a good heart and most of all with a lot of respect and humility, you'll be okay. So that was a lot. I know, probably kind of a big truth bomb to start out with. But, and I also just want to point out that the things that I'm going to share today, this isn't the only way to work with an Indigenous community. There are multiple approaches to culturally relevant instruction. So, for example, there's coming out of a piece of research done in 2017, a cross-case analysis of 3 Native science field centers. So when Cassie came to the field professional development I did, we brought in one of the people, Helene Gaddy from Generations Indigenous Ways, who is using this model to braid in Indigenous ways of knowing and Western STEM. So in no way do I want to present myself as being the expert, as this being the model. This is a model, and these are my experiences. So, all right, a little bit more about Ignite before we go into and unpack what it looks like in this context. Is Ignite has a learning framework, a wonder, investigate, and grow. And I'm going to turn on my pointer, I think. Here we go. So wonder, investigate, and grow. And this was developed by Dr. Oatman, and it's really grounded in the next generation science standards, three-dimensional instruction. If you are familiar with like the 5 E's, you can also see some of that there. At the South Dakota Discovery Center, we use something called EARS. Oh, and I forgot an A because it's a kind of a cute name, but that also we felt it unpacked the 5E model a little bit more specifically. So we have engage, explore, and explain. And that follows, of course, along with the phenomena forward to peak and perplex. Time for exploration, explain. This is when the sense making comes in for those of you who are interested in that style of pedagogy. Then the A's are apply and assess and reflect. So this is how we structure our curriculum that we develop. And the Ignite is similar to that. It was just easier to translate all of this rather than that. In thinking about our integration with the Oceti Sakowin Essential Understandings and STEM, we landed on these 4 practices to help us really be consistent through our integration. And so these are opportunities that when we're looking at a standard, and again, North American, US context, and when we look at a standard, we're thinking about how does this relate to the kinship of everything? Where are the opportunities for language, particularly vocabulary and place names? Is there an opportunity for storytelling here? And then where is the related STEM in the Oyate or community? And I'll unpack each one of these. The kinship of everything, and I'm having the OSEUs aligned here. I originally developed this for a South Dakota audience, so it would make more sense to them. Is basically the understanding that everything is connected. And this is a really fundamental understanding in Lakota culture, and indeed in many Indigenous cultures that I'm familiar with. In the globe framework, it is very similar to understanding the interactions of the 4 spheres, the biosphere, atmosphere, pedosphere, and oh gosh, I'm pulling a blank. Biosphere, atmosphere, pedosphere, hydrosphere. I should know that one. That's like my main sphere. And so when we teach the Earth systems, we talk about how they're interconnected and how, there's a transfer of energy and matter and cycles and all of that. And that's from the Western dominant cultural context. And it translates really well with that understanding that everything is connected in an Indigenous context. I do give the warning, or the caution, as maybe a better way to put it, is we really need to rethink about how we teach biotic and abiotic. Usually, biotic and abiotic. Biotic is everything that's living, abiotic is everything that's not living. I would propose that for biotic, we use breathes, eats, and grows, or for older students, undergoes cellular respiration versus doesn't breathe, eat, and grow, or no cellular respiration, instead of using living and non-living. For very young students, you could even say the biosphere is the world of plants and animals, if you wanted to get very specific about it. The reason we do this is because and I know this is a matter of semantics, but it's an important matter of semantics, is that in Indigenous cultures, anything with energy is alive. And even that's not uniform, but so in the Western culture, it's cellular respiration, it's that energy. Whereas in Indigenous culture, the kinetic energy of water makes it alive. So this is a point of confusion. We had a story come forward at the PD that we did in May from a Hopi woman who said that on an assessment, the student had to pick out which of these was not alive, and they were given like plant, one was like a car, but he really struggled because one of the options was water, or he had to pick the one that was alive. And so he was trying to decide between plant and water because to his way of thinking, they're both alive. Water is a relative. So there's that reframing that would be useful. From a Western concept perspective, I think it would also be useful because when you get into high school and try to understand cellular respiration, students don't think of plants as eating. They conflate photosynthesis with breathing. So, and that's not the same thing. So there's just a lot of reasons why we want to think about what is alive and how we define it and how we talk about it. There's an activity, traditional ecological kinship, that was developed by Stacy Laravie, Ponca educator. And I'm sorry for the scroll here, but in here, let's see, it's exploring traditional ecological kinships. And kinship is this connection, this relationship, again, a really important concept in Indigenous ways of knowing. Anyway, I will make sure, Cassie, I'm assuming is that people will be sharing out the slides and people will have access to these. Is that how this works?
Yeah, if you would like to share your deck, I can attach it to the description of the webinar with the recording, yes.
Okay, we will do that.
Thank you.
The other way of looking at these connections of Earth systems is simply that these are a series of videos I created, and the students have to identify the Earth systems interactions, and they're given a chart that kind of outlines them. But you'll see I'm in the Badlands for this, and this right here, that's a bison, or as the native people there call them, buffaloes. So you can think about when you're teaching concepts using imagery and pictures that are of interest and relevant to your students. And then also, of course, the kinship of everything is you can teach the place-based living, how our place gives us medicine, food, clothes, examples for engineering. And again, this engineering one comes from a material science activity on using the yucca plant for rope and fiber. Another practice when we're thinking about integrating Indigenous ways of knowing with STEM is we think really intentionally about language, vocabulary, and place names. So, I didn't. I'll just read this to you, which I know you're not supposed to do. We think about how to integrate vocabulary and place names into instruction. We want to replace rather than supplement when possible, meaning that when we introduce the word for meadowlark, we call it, and I can't pronounce the word, it's and that would just be how it was used throughout the whole lesson. So from a very young age, Native children first think of it as a tashiangnumpa as opposed to a meadowlark. Maps Maps are super important. Maps are very political. And if you don't think of a map as political, it's because you probably belong to the dominant culture, and this is the way it has been presented to you since time immemorial. Uh, One of the things we do is we use Google Earth to revise maps so that they actually have the Lakota name. And keep in mind, in the US, and I imagine other places too, is that all these places were named something else before Euro Americans came. So the default is that you have this set up so you have both, but you can clear out by adding view layers. That's what we want. So I'm going to just do a clean layer. And so now all that is seen are the names that I've added. And I'm not saying you have to do this for everything, but there's a lot of opportunity to do it for really culturally sensitive or places like the Heshapa, the Black Hills in Hanhaga. That is Black Elk Peak. Minilusahan. So it makes a huge difference. I actually have a print map created by the Lower Brule Sioux tribe, and I handed it out at a PD I did last summer at Ogallala Lakota College. And the teachers there spent an hour just looking at the map and talking about it because they had never seen such a thing where the names and the legends and everything like that were made for them. So whenever possible, think about how you can integrate um, an Indigenous perspective on the maps. Storytelling. Indigenous cultures have a really strong tradition of storytelling. And you can use traditional and contemporary stories by Native authors to illustrate, relate, or align STEM concepts. So, again, just this is one of these places where you learn. Stories aren't necessarily yours for the taking. You don't necessarily tell them whenever you want to whomever you want. Um, some stories are meant for certain ceremonies, certain times of year, particularly in winter. And that feels very foreign to some of us. Like, no, story is a story. Some stories are already out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be the one just kind of grabbing them off the internet and integrating them into instruction. That's really where you need the cultural person to say, is this okay? Should I be using this story here in this place now? This is a fun story. This was actually written by a young woman. She just finished her teacher training, and it's called Ampetui Helps You and Me, and I've used it. I have her permission to use this. She wrote it on a Jamboard. No, I guess this is the PowerPoint. She originally wrote it on a Jamboard, and we put it into a PowerPoint. Unfortunately, we haven't had it illustrated. So all these illustrations here are AI, which is kind of bleh, but there you go. So we'll just it's pretty short. And those of you who are familiar with the kindergarten Earth science standard about the sun, or maybe it's a physical science standard about the sun, you'll see what we're trying to accomplish here. Petui and Unshimacha are very good friends. When Unshimacha was young, she was alone and cold until Petui brought her light and warmth. That is what we've been told. Ampetui is not only light, he gives us warmth inside and outside. Yes, he may be far, but he looks out for everyone, even you and me. When we feel his light and warmth on our face, sometimes we get too warm, too hot, and wish for some shade. Good thing Unshimacha grew us trees so we can sit on we good thing Unshimacha grew us trees we can sit under so we can keep cool. During the winter, when it is very cold, with snow as tall as you and me, he reaches down and melts the snow, not too fast and not too slow, just enough so we can go and play. And yes, it leaves puddles that make our shoes muddy. So he warms the puddles up into an invisible steam, returning Mini to Machpia or Mapia so that our shoes stay clean. Mini means water and Machpia is cloud. So now you can see, so now you see he cares very much for Unchimacha, you and me. Thank you, Ampetui. So it's a very sweet story. And the very beginnings where it says Ampetui and Unchimacha are friends, that has deep, deep cultural integrations and connections. And so that would be a point at which the teacher could bring in an elder to explain a little bit more to the students about that beginning story, that relationship between Ampetui and Unshimacha. So, okay. Oops. Yeah, here we go. Now we have STEM in the Oyate. And Oyate, as I said earlier, means community. And really, what we're looking to do is to elevate contemporary native STEM scholars and traditional ecological knowledge. And I got this definition of a scholar from the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. And I believe, I'm trying to think if Dr. Elena Sparrow is part of that consortium. So, what a scholar is, we define a scholar as an expert within their own knowledge system. This includes hunters, fishers, and gatherers, those that process and store food, health aides, and others. It includes youth, elders, and adults. Your education may have come from the land, the water, or a classroom. That really opens up what is a knowledgeable person, who is the expert in the room. And we're very interested, and I should have probably prefaced some of my comments with this about the use of equitable practices in this. That if you're not sure where to begin at all, you begin with the best equitable practices because they're intended to make everybody welcome, everybody feel part, to reduce barriers and to reduce privilege. And if you're not sure what I mean by equitable practices, I'll just stop sharing my screen for a moment because it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm talking about. Let me give you an example from the Ignite curriculum. So in third grade, there's a physical science about forces in motion. And in kindergarten, they would have used cars, little race cars, or maybe balls down a track. And the higher you start, the farther they go. About all of that. We decided in third grade that we would start with hoops. The hoop, of course, the circle is a really important signifier. And plus, too, by third grade, they're ready for something other than rolling a ball down a track. They've done that. They need something else. So we felt like a hoop was like a good next step. So their starting task is the sort of this engage piece is they're given a hoop and the task is to find how many different ways can you make the hoop move. So I was doing this PD in a class, actually at a science conference, and in the breakout room, we had a woman who had taught physics for 20 years. And I also had a young woman who I'm not quite sure how she ended up at the science conference, but she was a pre-service social studies teacher. And so I was like, oh, okay. But when I gave everybody this task of how many ways can you make this hoop move, everybody from the 20-year physics teacher to the pre-service social studies teacher, I don't know when the last time she had a science class was, maybe high school, maybe college, I don't know. But everybody got up and everybody was able to engage and everybody was able to share their ideas. Now, did the science teacher, did the 20-year physics teacher, did she have advantages? Could she, reach that point of explanation more quickly? Absolutely. But to start out with, everybody participates and everybody contributes. And that's just one equitable practice. I'm not saying that's the only one, but being grounded in equitable practices is really critical for culturally responsible cross-cultural instruction. So I'll go back to sharing my screen again since I'm finished with that story. Okay, so when we're talking about STEM in the Oyate, with this definition of scholar, that leaves us a lot of room for who's the expert, who's the STEM scholar. And so it could be your science and math teachers, your natural resource staff, your gardeners, IT staff, then more traditional occupations or practices, quilt makers, medicine gatherers, people like that. And also when you're talking about STEM, at least in the US, again, I apologize that there are people here who are working with Indigenous communities, and I don't know what the political structure is, but in the US, the federally recognized tribes do have a government, and there many of them do have universities. And so there are lots of opportunities to highlight what the tribal government and what the tribal colleges are doing with engineering and environmental projects. So it's not like you have to go someplace else. The idea is to bring it home. This is happening right here in your community. And, the whole concept of windows and mirrors, windows you see through, mirrors you see yourself. This is both. Putting STEM in the community is both a window and a mirror. Um, we'll take a since we well I think I'll just pause for questions before I go into what is an essential understanding. I've kind of fire hosed you with a lot of different ideas and our approaches. Does anybody have any questions?
If you do have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you so you can ask your question to Anne. And as you think of them during the rest of Anne's presentation, the same invitation is still out there. Raise your hand and Anne will probably notice it and will unmute you so you can ask your question.
Okay, I will go back to sharing my screen. So the essential understandings, I keep talking about those. And so I thought we would just open this up so you can see what we mean by these. As I said at the beginning, the essential understandings were developed originally by a work group around the South Dakota Education Association. The State Department of Education has since taken them on. And in South Dakota, to be a certified teacher, you have to take a semester of Native American Studies where you look at the OSCUs. So these are currently being revised. They're referred to sometimes as content standards. They're not really content standards. They're more what you should understand. So, and once I get done scrolling. So let me go ahead and make this bigger if I can. Okay. So the OSCUs are, the first one is about lands and environment. What the people of the Oceti Sakowin want us, what they feel is important to be taught about lands and the environment. And there's specifically talk about communal stewardship and a distinct and unique interrelationship with the environment. Identity and resiliency, and this speaks mainly to the people of about identity, that this is an important phrase. There is no generic American Indian, especially in the US. We tend to, kind of have a pan Indian concept, and beyond a few big ideas, we don't. There is no such thing. Culture and language. Again, in this Oceti Sakowin, there are actually 3 dialects: Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. And I'm friends on Facebook with some fluent Lakota speakers. And it's interesting to hear them talk about the other dialects. Like, they wish they knew the words. They wish they knew how it was pronounced. They could communicate. This 7 council fires was developed for economic and security reasons, but they're still very different people. The Dakota people tend to come from Minnesota and those lands up there. So they were very much a woodlands agricultural community, while the Lakota are more hunter-gatherers, nomadic, they followed the buffalo. Oral tradition and story, this is how they pass down knowledge. And this is something they want to preserve, they feel is very integral to their culture. Sovereignty and treaties. Sovereignty is a really big idea. And I don't know that most Americans, at least, understand it. And I'll give you my rather faltering, incomplete version of what it is. That sovereignty is essentially that the tribal governments are still of their own nation. They are a distinct nation. Now, they're still under the US nationality. It's not like they're a completely different, like they're Canadian. But it's sort of like when you are born a tribal member, you are born with dual citizenship, basically to your tribal community as well as to the US and your state. So this is distinct in that from our normal concept of heritage. And the way I describe it is like, I'm of Irish heritage. But if I were to try to go to the Irish, fly across the ocean and go into Dublin airport and get in line, and they'll be like, okay, show us your passport. And it's like, well, I'm Irish because my great great grandfather came from Ireland. They'd be like, sorry, you're not getting in the country. You are not Irish. You're of Irish heritage. And that's the difference. It's like, you can have native heritage, but that doesn't necessarily make you native. Because there is this element of citizenship and of recognizing of the tribe, recognizing who is there, who is part of their community. And the way that's determined is somewhat controversial. The US government set it up as blood quantums, and the tribes that's one of these places where your lane, and that is a question for the tribal government to figure out who belongs to them. So when you hear somebody being referred to as a pretendian or something like that, it's because they probably have claimed a native heritage or native citizenship when they really should have just claimed native heritage. And then the OSU way of life and development. And it refers to education and economic development. The National Museum of the American Indian also created the Essential Understandings. And I've seen other states, like Montana has an Essential Understandings about their tribal communities. But if you are not currently in collaboration or have a relationship with, or you're in some sort of partnership with a tribal nation, this would be a good place for you to start understanding what it is that Indigenous people in the US want the dominant culture to understand about them. All right. And I think that's everything I have. Anything you want to see? Anything you want me to go over again? Anybody want to bring forward their experiences working with Indigenous people? Because, like I said, this is my context and this is my approach.
And in our society, quiet is uncomfortable, but I don't think it should be. I think that I am just so in awe of this presentation. I think it's so thoughtful and so useful that I can't think of the question I want to ask you right now. But I think that once I sit for a while, I'm going to want to sit down and have a coffee with you and hear a lot more about what you are doing. Really, I think that everybody here is listening to you and hearing the importance of humility, the importance of respect. You know, you have what those are things that you have woven throughout this very, very interesting discussion. So I'm just making that comment rather than asking you a question at the present time. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And yeah, this isn't comfortable. And this goes back to my original, in the very first thing about our approach, responsible to versus responsible for, because there are some hard truths. There are some, there's some really uncomfortable things involved in this. And, I've learned a lot of them the hard way, like the whole thing about teaching how we teach life. I would go in there in my best globe, with my, my globe aura, or, whatever. I don't actually have a t-shirt, but if I did, I'd be wearing it. And it would be a matter of, the hydrosphere is the water, the pedosphere is soil, the atmosphere is air, and the biosphere is living things. And there would just be, and then when I changed it, I started seeing nodding heads. And I realized all those years I was saying things and people were really just not responding.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that Native people, at least in the cultures I work with, it's not always safe to correct someone from the dominant culture. Even if you're the most ally of allies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it's like, honestly, it's like they'll figure it out or they won't. That's and Denise actually, our person, our Hopi participant, said the general thing is like, it's not my job to fix your wrongness.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Great. Tori has a question. Tori, you've written it in the chat. Would you like to pose it yourself?
Yes, I am a retired educator from Alaska, but during my time as an educator, there's always been a sense of urgency. That, there's pacing guides, there's lessons that need to be done in a certain amount of time. How I always struggled with balancing this with the intentional wait time and cadence in a Native culture. Do you have any suggestions for how to do that?
Oh, that's a great question. And honestly, I am not really the person to answer that because I am not in a Native classroom. You my sense in watching some of the teachers is they keep up with the pacing guides and that they'll kind of keep up with that. But knowing that their students and especially their students' families may or may not come along. And so it really is, as my best advice, and it's not all that good, is to keep finding teachable moments and bringing in every real world application that you can. Because when it becomes real and not theoretical, that's when people get excited and interested. And I'm sort of conflating my experiential learning here, is that experiential learning, that's when it becomes relevant and meaningful. And when you bring yourself and you bring things that are relevant to your students in, you can kind of push a little bit harder. That's not a great answer, but it's the only one I have right now.
And if
Thanks,
there are
Tori, for
other
the great
questions,
question. Yeah,
go ahead, Rusty. Sorry.
I was just going to thank Tori for the great question. I
Yeah.
think that was a
Oh,
good
yeah.
one. We all need to think about what the answer might be for that and how to address that. Tori, did you have any solutions for that when you were in the classroom?
I did a lot of what she suggested with place-based learning and just bringing the outside in, or doing a lot of classwork outside. I'm finding this now as I'm a science education specialist with the International Arctic Research Center, that doing this with adults in the room as I educate adults is even trickier than with kids. It's a little bit easier to read kids than it is adults sometimes.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. One thing I have found, Tori, that has changed the way I approach this is I do a project-based learning, even with adults. So I offer that for what it is, and just what that means is, like, for example, I do a workshop at Shintek University, and most of our time together is actually them working on a project, synthesizing and creating a resource. I've had everything from a poem to a TikTok video to interpretive beading to videos to explain some of the concepts. So
the other thing that it's tricky is when you bring elders into the classroom, it seems like I never give enough time for them to speak. And it's struggling with that whole keeping on pace with what I've planned, or what do I give up to create more time, or how do I respectfully stay on time? Tips for that would be great.
Oh, I would need to talk to some of my teachers about that, because that is tough. It's I yeah, especially when if you're talking with a circle talker. And that's another really important thing to understand, is they'll start talking and you're like, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But if you wait long enough, it does come back around. Yeah, that sense of time is huge. And you just have to do the cost benefit analysis of allowing this elder to speak and the learning that will happen, versus what is supposed to be happening in the classroom per the usual education requirements.
Thank you. I know those are tough questions.
Yeah, but those are worth shopping out to people who do work in Indigenous spaces, is because this is one of those areas where you have like core cultural and societal constructs around time and speakers, and the way we talk and information is presented, and that's really where you see them rub. And so how do you resolve them?
And I taught in a school here in Sioux Falls my classes were predominantly Native kids. And I found that I overpacked my lesson plans. because I always felt I had to get to a certain point. But the moment I started realizing that kids would much rather sit and visit and talk, and we talked about what we needed to, but we did it not on my plan, but we did it on their plan. And it was a lot more fun for everybody. So I didn't have to overpack as much in my lesson plans. But
Doesn't that just kill you when you realize you were the least important person in someone's learning as an educator? It's like, oh man, because I used to do the same thing, just kind of shove one more activity, one more. And it's like, yeah, I wasn't doing anything. Yeah. So
I know that. Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate your time and the energies and the insight that you provided to us. And I know that the folks who are here probably are going to be, what we're all doing is thinking about what we just heard, and we might have questions. Is it all right? I mean, we can talk offline, but to put your email into and I'll show everybody the webpage where we post the recorded videos, but it could be your email address that people could reach out if they have additional questions. And
yep,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just put my email in the chat for anybody who wants it right away.
Thank you.
Yes. And Sophie, I saw your question. Yes, the slide deck will be made available.
I have just one last slide to kind of wrap up our time together today. And our Mission Mosquito webinar recordings are located at this URL, and you can find them all the way back to our beginning in 2018, I believe. But we do have a variety of mosquito resources that are here. And there's two new ones, insect inspection and time-lapse activities that bring together the mosquito and land cover tools that we have. But I think that used together that they would be great for storytelling and would be an awesome way to kind of reach out to different communities and tell your story about how you've noticed, for example, climate changes and the occurrences of mosquitoes. And in South Dakota, we've experienced torrential rains lately. And so we can expect to see some changes in our insect population in the next couple of weeks. If you'd like to build knowledge of mosquitoes and their habitats, these 4 resources are phenomenal. 3 of them have been created by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, the Mission Mosquito Larva Hunter's Guide, and there's a facilitator's guide that goes with it, with lots of how to teach each of the activities in the guide. The Habitats and Hideouts teaches where to look for mosquito larvae and to take photographs or to eliminate water when it's possible so that those mosquitoes, female mosquitoes, don't lay their eggs there. Beyond the Bite talks about the diseases that mosquitoes carry and their place in history. And then tapping into the National Geographic connection that we had today with Anne, Dr. Rusty Lowe worked with the Smithsonian on Mosquito, a community research guide that is also available. So those are all found on this website, globe.gov, Mission Mosquito Overview, and then there's resources there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and thank again, Anne, very much for spending your afternoon with us, and hope that we can get together again for a continuation of our discussion, possibly after the Globe annual meeting. There won't be a similar webinar in July, but there's a possibility there will be some students presenting their IBSS project during our July Globe annual meeting time. So if there are any questions, please, reach out to Anne, Dr. Lowe, or myself, and we're happy to connect you and work with you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. Thanks,
Thank
Cassie.
you, Anne. Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you.